Chapter 1: The Party and the Truth. Sally Hamilton adjusted the sleeve of her blazer for the third time before ringing the doorbell. The fabric sat perfectly against her wrist. It always did. She had chosen it carefully. Deep navy, tailored, structured enough to suggest authority while still soft enough to feel approachable. It was the kind of detail people noticed, even if they didn't quite register why. Appearances mattered. The door opened quickly, before she could second-guess whether the blazer was too much for a housewarming party. Sally, her younger brother, Daniel, pulled her into a hug that was warm, unpolished, and slightly crushing in its enthusiasm. It wrinkled her sleeve. She froze for a fraction of a second before relaxing into it. "Hey," she said, smoothing it out when he let go. "You didn't say parking would be this easy." He laughed. "It's a neighborhood, not a downtown garage." She smiled, stepping inside. The house smelled faintly of grilled food and fresh paint. People milled about in comfortable clusters. Friends, co-workers, a few neighbors already acting like regulars. Someone had music playing low enough that conversations didn't require raised voices. It was easy. She noticed things immediately. The way the furniture actually looked used instead of staged. The slight mismatch between chairs, unified not by brand but by color. The soft wear on the edges of the coffee table. The absence of anything that felt fragile. It wasn't imperfect. It was lived in. And, unsettlingly, it worked. "You did all this?" she asked, glancing around. Daniel shrugged, already reaching to grab 2 drinks from a nearby counter. "Mostly. Couple long weekends. Some favors. Nothing fancy." He handed her one. She accepted it, though she wasn't sure she wanted it. She rarely drank at events like this. It blurred the sharp edges she relied on. "It looks good," she said, meaning more than she intended. "Thanks," he replied easily, as if he believed her without needing proof. For the next hour, she moved through the party the way she always did, effortlessly engaging, smiling at the right moments, asking questions that made people feel interesting. It was a practiced skill, one that had served her well professionally and socially. She noticed, however, that no one here seemed to need that from her. Conversations didn't hinge on her approval. People didn't subtly measure her reactions. They laughed freely, spoke over each other occasionally, interrupted with comfortable familiarity. They weren't performing. She found herself drifting toward the kitchen at one point, standing alone for a moment longer than she intended. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't her usual role either. "You hiding?" She turned to find Daniel leaning against the counter, watching her with an expression she knew too well. "I'm observing," she corrected. "Of course you are." She sipped the drink, mostly to give herself something to do. "You've got a good group here." "Yeah," he said simply. She wanted to ask how he'd built it. Instead, she nodded. By the time the evening wound down, people began filtering out with easy goodbyes and vague promises that didn't sound empty. The volume dropped gradually rather than abruptly. Sally stayed. She lingered in the doorway once the last guest left, watching Daniel collect empty cups without urgency. "You don't have to help," he said without looking up. "I know." She didn't move. After a moment, he straightened and leaned back against the counter again. "All right," he said. "What is it?" She huffed a quiet laugh. "What makes you think there's something?" "You stayed." "Fair," she admitted. She walked further into the room, glancing again at the space, noticing it differently now that it was quiet. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know." There was no arrogance in it, just certainty. She folded her arms, then immediately uncrossed them. "I mean it. This is good. You've got something here." He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't come here just to tell me that." "No," she said softly. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but expectant. She exhaled. "I feel like I'm falling behind." He didn't react immediately. He rarely did. "I thought," she continued, "by now I'd have more. Not things," she added quickly, even though she knew that wasn't entirely true. "Just something solid." Daniel studied her for a moment, then asked the question she had been anticipating and dreading. "Do you want the truth? Or do you want me to make you feel better?" Her lips pressed together. That was his way. Always had been. "The truth," she said. He nodded once, accepting the contract. "You spend too much money trying to impress people who don't care about you," he said calmly. "And you're chasing men who care about the same things." It landed exactly where it was meant to. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He held her gaze, not backing down but not pushing either. "You think we're in the same position," he continued. "Or that maybe I'm ahead because of something lucky. I'm not." He named his salary. She blinked. "That's less than I thought," she said before she could stop herself. "By over 30,000, he replied. The number settled between them, heavy and undeniable. She tried to reconcile it quickly, her mind racing through expenses, assumptions, explanations. None of them quite fit. "I don't understand," she admitted quietly. "You don't have to," he said. "Not all at once. Just understand this, you're not behind. You're just running in the wrong direction." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And the job?" he asked gently. She gave a small, humorless smile. I hate it. I know. You always know, she muttered. It's a gift. She rolled her eyes, but it didn't stick. He straightened slightly. So here's my idea. She looked at him sharply. Oh no. Hear me out. That's never good. Sally. She sighed. Fine. Quit your job. She stared at him. Come work with me, he continued. I was already thinking about growing the business, hiring someone. If it's you, I'll make it a partnership eventually. Once you prove you won't bankrupt us. Wow, she said dryly. Very comforting. I'm serious, he replied. You're smart. You understand design. You just need to stop confusing expensive with good. She looked around the room again. It wasn't expensive, but it was good. And where would I even live? She asked, softer now. He gestured vaguely down the hallway. I've got a spare room. Stay here. Save money. Figure things out. That's a lot. It is. She stood there, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to relief. I wouldn't ask, he added, if I didn't think we could build something great. She met his eyes. For the first time in a long while, the path ahead of her didn't look polished or impressive. It looked uncertain, real, and unexpectedly possible. Chapter 2, The Unraveling. Sally didn't remember the drive home. She remembered pulling out of Daniel's quiet neighborhood. She remembered the soft wash of streetlights across her windshield. After that, the timeline dissolved into fragments. Red lights, a turn she didn't consciously decide to take, the glow of her building appearing suddenly like a place she had never seen before. She parked in her assigned spot with mechanical precision, engine idling longer than necessary. Her reflection stared back at her from the rearview mirror. Perfect hair, minimalist jewelry, controlled expression. It all looked correct. It all felt wrong. You're not behind, she murmured under her breath, repeating Daniel's words as if testing them for structural weakness. You're running in the wrong direction. Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. That's dramatic, she added, a little louder, as if arguing with someone sitting beside her. The empty passenger seat didn't respond. She turned off the car. The quiet that followed felt heavier than silence should. Her apartment building rose in front of her with its familiar, curated elegance. Clean lines, carefully maintained landscaping, warm exterior lighting designed to suggest both luxury and comfort. It had impressed her the first time she saw it. It still impressed people when they visited. Inside, nothing had changed. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. A soft instrumental track played somewhere overhead, engineered to be pleasant but forgettable. The concierge gave her a polite nod, the kind that acknowledged her presence without requiring any deeper engagement. Sally, he said, as he always did. Evening, she replied, as she always did. Routine. Predictable. Seamless. She stepped into the elevator and pressed her floor. The doors closed with a whisper, sealing her inside a mirrored box that showed her from every angle. She shifted slightly, adjusting her posture. Even alone, she performed. The observation hit harder than she expected. When the doors opened, she walked down the quiet hallway, heels clicking softly in measured rhythm. Each step felt rehearsed like muscle memory rather than intention. Her apartment door opened with a smooth, satisfying turn of the key. Inside, everything was exactly where it belonged. The couch aligned perfectly with the rug. Decorative pillows arranged with asymmetrical precision. A coffee table styled with books she had never finished and a small ceramic piece she had bought because someone once said it was interesting. The lighting was warm but controlled. The space looked like a magazine spread. And suddenly, for the first time, it felt like one too. She closed the door behind her and stood there, just inside it, taking it in. Okay, she said quietly. Let's just. She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she walked slowly into the living room, her eyes moving over surfaces she had curated piece by piece over the years. Each item had a reason, or at least it had once. Now, the reasons felt thinner. She reached for one of the books on the coffee table, flipping it open at random. The pages were pristine. I meant to read this, she said, almost defensively. No one contradicted her. She set it down again, not quite in the same position. It bothered her. She adjusted it, then stopped herself. Seriously? She muttered, pulling her hand back. Who cares? The silence seemed to echo the question. She moved to the kitchen, pulling open the refrigerator without thinking. It was stocked in a way that looked functional but wasn't. Ingredients for meals she rarely cooked, items chosen for balance rather than need. She grabbed a bottle of water, leaning against the counter as she took a long drink. You're not behind, she repeated, softer now. Her gaze drifted toward the far wall, where a framed abstract print hung. Expensive, carefully selected, entirely impersonal. How much did that cost? She asked aloud. She knew the answer. She wished she didn't. The thought triggered another, and another, cascading faster than she could comfortably follow. The rent, the furniture, the wardrobe, the dinners, the memberships, the life. Her phone buzzed faintly in her bag, breaking the spiral. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message notification, From a coworker. Great seeing you earlier this week. Lunch soon? Sally stared at it for a moment, her thumb hovering over the reply. Lunch soon. She pictured it instantly. Another carefully chosen restaurant. Another conversation orbiting around deals, connections, appearances. The subtle calculations. The quiet competition wrapped in friendliness. She started to type. Of course. She stopped. Her brother's voice cut through her thoughts with unsettling clarity. You're chasing people who don't care about you. She deleted the message. Retyped. I'll check my schedule and get back to you. Non-committal. Safe. She set the phone down and exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous, she said, pushing off the counter. You're overreacting. It's one conversation. One idea. But it didn't feel like one. It felt like everything. She walked back into the living room and sank onto the couch, careful not to disturb the arrangement. For a moment, she simply sat there, hands clasped loosely, staring ahead. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and opened her laptop. If she was going to prove Daniel wrong, or herself, she wasn't entirely sure. She needed clarity. Numbers didn't lie. They also didn't comfort. She opened her banking app first. The balance stared back at her. Okay, she said, nodding once. That's fine. It wasn't fine. She clicked into her transaction history, scrolling. Rent, utilities, car payment, normal. Then the smaller things, clothing purchases, frequent, justified at the time as necessary, strategic, professional. Dining, coffee, events, all reasonable individually. Together, she leaned back slowly, her breath catching somewhere between her chest and her throat. No, she said, shaking her head. No, this is just how it is. Her voice sounded thinner now. She pulled up her credit accounts. The numbers there felt less abstract, less forgiving. Okay, she murmured. This is normal. People carry balances. She stopped, because she didn't actually know that. Not in any meaningful way. She thought of Daniel again. His house, his calm certainty, his ability to say things like I know without needing to prove it. His salary echoed in her mind. More than 30,000 less. And you have a house, she said aloud, a quiet, disbelieving laugh escaping her. You have a house and I have throw pillows. She looked down at them. They looked back, silently decorative. A strangled sound escaped her before she could stop it. Half laugh, half something else. This is insane. But the word didn't dismiss the feeling. If anything, it clarified it. She sat there for a long time, going through the numbers again. Slower this time. Not arguing with them. Not justifying them. Just seeing them. When she finally closed the laptop, the room felt different. It hadn't changed. The realization was both subtle and overwhelming. Her gaze moved around the space once more. What had felt curated now felt crowded. What had felt impressive now felt heavy. What had felt necessary now felt optional. She stood, the motion abrupt enough to surprise even herself. Okay, she said more firmly now. Okay. She walked to her bedroom, pulling open the closet doors. Inside, everything was arranged by color and category, immaculate and intentional. She reached out, running her fingers along the line of hanging clothes. How many of these do I actually wear? She asked. The answer came uncomfortably fast. Not many. She pulled one out at random. A dress she had bought for an event she barely remembered. The tags were still on. She stared at it for a moment. Then, with a small, decisive motion, she laid it across the bed. One, she said. Another followed. Then another. A pile began to form, hesitant at first, then growing with increasing momentum. At some point, her phone buzzed again. She didn't check it. She kept going. By the time she stepped back, the bed was half covered. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Her chest rose and fell in a measured rhythm as she took it in. This is what it looks like, she said quietly. This is what it looks like. The unraveling wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, methodical, real. She sat on the edge of the bed, the pile beside her, and let her hands rest in her lap. Daniel's offer hovered in her mind, no longer abstract. Quit your job. Come work with me. It had sounded impossible a few hours ago. Now it sounded like a question she couldn't ignore. She glanced back toward the living room, toward the carefully arranged life she had built. Then down at the evidence of her habits spread across the bed. Okay, she said again, almost a whisper. Not an answer. Not yet. But closer than she had ever been. And for the first time in a long while, the idea of tomorrow didn't feel like something she already understood. It felt open, unsettling, and quietly hopeful. Chapter 3. Moving in. Sally arrived at Daniel's house with more bags than she had intended and fewer than she felt comfortable admitting. Her trunk was full. The back seat was strategically packed. She had told herself she was only bringing the essentials, for now. It had sounded sensible when she said it out loud in her apartment 24 hours earlier. Standing in the driveway now, it sounded like a half-truth. This is temporary, she muttered as she opened the trunk. The words came automatically like a reflex. The problem was, She didn't quite know what temporary meant anymore. The front door opened before she could second-guess the number of suitcases she'd chosen. "Wow," Daniel said, stepping out onto the porch. "You joining me or moving in permanently?" She shot him a look. "Helpful. I try." He came down the steps anyway, grabbing one of the heavier bags without asking. "You said a few things." "These are a few things," she insisted. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Inside, the house looked much the same as it had the night of the party. Comfortable, functional, quietly welcoming. There were small signs of daily life now. A pair of shoes near the door, a mug left on the counter, something draped over the back of a chair. It didn't look staged. It didn't apologize for that. "Room's the same," Daniel said, leading the way down the hall. "Cleaned it out last night." She followed, a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort tightening in her chest. "You didn't have to." "I know." He opened the door. The room was simple. A bed, a dresser, a small desk, neutral walls, soft light from a single window that looked out onto the backyard. There were no decorative accents, no curated pieces, no attempt to impress. And yet, "It's nice," she said quietly. "It's yours for as long as you need it," he replied, setting her bag down near the foot of the bed. "Thank you." He nodded once, as if the matter required no further discussion. She stood there for a moment after he left, her hand resting lightly on the dresser. The surface was bare. Her instinct was immediate and familiar. It needs something. Plant. A framed photo. A carefully chosen object to make it feel complete. She caught herself. "It's already complete," she said under her breath. The words felt tentative, uncertain, but not entirely untrue. A knock sounded lightly against the open doorframe. She turned. Daniel leaned there, one shoulder against the wood. "You settling in or having an existential crisis? Can't it be both?" "Fair," he said. "Come on. I want to show you something." She hesitated, glancing once more around the room before following him back down the hall. "What is it?" she asked. "Work," he said simply. "That's ominous." He led her through the kitchen and toward the back of the house, opening a door that connected to the garage. The moment she stepped inside, the shift was immediate. This wasn't part of the home she had seen during the party. The garage had been transformed into a workspace, organized but not polished. Shelving lined the walls, filled with materials, samples, tools. A large work table sat at the center, its surface marked with use rather than protected from it. Fabric swatches, paint samples, wood finishes. This was where things actually happened. "Okay," she said slowly, looking around. "This is different." "Good different or concerning different?" Daniel asked. "I'm not sure yet. That's honest." He moved further into the space, picking up a set of sample boards. "This is where most of the design work starts. Clients think it's all showrooms and presentations. It's not." Sally stepped closer, her eyes scanning the details. There was no hierarchy here, no obvious markers of what was premium and what wasn't. Everything was evaluated by how it worked, not how it looked alone. "I see what you mean," she said. "Do you?" She glanced at him. "I'm trying." "Close enough." The sound of the side door opening cut through the moment. Daniel looked up. Perfect timing. Sally turned as someone stepped into the garage from the driveway. He wasn't what she expected. She wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. But not this. He carried a long, narrow box under one arm, his other hand pushing the door shut behind him with practiced ease. His clothes were practical, worn without being careless. There was nothing polished about him, but there was nothing uncertain either. "Hey," Daniel said. "You're late." "By 7 minutes," the man replied, setting the box down on the work table. "You're slipping." Sally watched the exchange, noting the ease of it. "No," Daniel said. "You're just consistent." The man's attention shifted. It landed on her. Brief, assessing. Not unkind, but not softened either. "And this is?" he asked. "Sally," Daniel said. "My sister." Something flickered in the man's expression, recognition, maybe. Amusement. "The one who organizes her books by color?" he asked. Sally straightened slightly. "For visual consistency." "Of course," he said. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole," he replied. "I build the things your brother promises people." "That sounds like a risky arrangement." "It is," he said. "For both of us." Daniel sighed. "Ignore him." "I'd like to," Sally said lightly. Ethan leaned against the edge of the table, folding his arms. "So you're joining the business?" "Potentially," she said. "We're discussing it." "We're not discussing it," Daniel corrected. "You're deciding." She ignored him. Ethan watched her for another moment, then nodded once. "All right." That was it. No welcome. No polite enthusiasm. Just acknowledgement. "What does that mean?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "It means we'll see," he replied. "See what?" "If you last." A beat of silence. Sally blinked. "Excuse me?" "She'll last," Daniel said quickly. Ethan didn't look at him. "I didn't say she wouldn't." "You implied it." "I stated a variable." Sally let out a small, incredulous laugh. Is he always like this? Yes, Daniel said. No, Ethan said at the same time. They glanced at each other briefly. Mostly, Daniel amended. Sally shifted her weight, folding her arms unconsciously mirroring Ethan's stance. For the record, I've had a successful career for 10 years. In what? Ethan asked. Client relations and operations. High-end branding. He considered that. And you liked it? He asked. She opened her mouth and paused. The hesitation was small, but it was enough. Ethan's gaze didn't change, but something about it sharpened. That's what I thought. I didn't say that, she said. You didn't have to. Her jaw tightened slightly. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know this. He gestured vaguely around the space. This isn't about appearances. If that's your angle, it won't work. Sally felt the words land in a place she wasn't quite ready to examine. And what is your angle? She asked. Things that hold up, he said without hesitation. Things that get used. Things that don't fall apart the first time someone actually lives with them. That's a very philosophical approach to furniture. It's not philosophical, he replied. It's practical. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away first. Okay, she said, quieter now. Good to know. Daniel clapped his hands once, breaking the tension. Great. Everyone's met. No one's quit yet. Progress. Ethan picked up the box he had brought in, opening it to reveal hardware. Neatly sorted, clearly functional. We've got a client site tomorrow, he said, addressing Daniel but not excluding Sally. If she's in, she should come. She's in, Daniel said. Sally looked between them. I said I was deciding. You are, Daniel agreed. You can decide while carrying lumber. Ethan almost smiled. Sally noticed. Do I look like someone who carries lumber? She asked. Ethan met her gaze again, entirely unbothered. No. The answer was immediate, honest, and, annoyingly, not entirely unfair. Then tomorrow should be interesting, she said. That's one word for it, he replied. She exhaled slowly, something shifting beneath her frustration. Not comfort, not yet, but something that felt real, as if the world she had stepped into didn't need her to perform to exist inside it. I'll be ready, she said finally. Daniel nodded. Ethan gave a brief, satisfied tilt of his head. And for the first time since she had packed her life into a series of carefully selected bags, Sally had the distinct feeling she had just agreed to something she didn't fully understand. Something inconvenient. Something uncomfortable. Something that might, just might, change everything. Chapter 4. The work begins. Sally woke before her alarm. Took her a moment to remember where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, simpler, lower, without the subtle architectural detail she had once considered essential. The light through the window was softer, less filtered. The room held no carefully curated personality beyond what it needed to function. For a brief second, she felt displaced. Then it came back. The house. The decision. Ethan. Her eyes closed again briefly. Great, she muttered into the pillow. Let's go carry lumber. The words sounded absurd out loud. She sat up anyway. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was already moving through it with quiet efficiency. Coffee brewed. Toast half-browned. A routine that looked established, not performed. You're up early, he said, glancing over his shoulder. I didn't want to be late. He smirked lightly. You don't want him to think you won't last. I don't care what he thinks, she replied. Daniel didn't turn around this time. Sure. Sally crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. I don't. Good, he said, handing her a mug. Then you won't mind proving him wrong anyway. She accepted the coffee. The smell alone felt grounding. I'm not proving anything, she said. Of course not. They stood there for a moment in silence, the kind that didn't require filling. Wear something you can ruin, Daniel added. She glanced down at her outfit. A fitted blouse, dark jeans, boots that were casual but still considered. I can ruin this, she said defensively. Daniel took a deliberate look. You'll try not to. She exhaled. I'll change. Smart. Back in her room, she stood in front of the open bag she hadn't fully unpacked. Her options felt limited. Comfortable clothes existed in her wardrobe, but they had always been framed carefully, styled, controlled, not used. She picked out a simpler shirt. Less structure, less shape, then hesitated. This is ridiculous, she said to herself. It was just clothing. Still, when she changed and caught her reflection in the mirror, something about it felt unfamiliar in a way that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Less effort, less expectation. She grabbed her hair, pulling it into a quick tie without overthinking the symmetry. That's fine, she decided. For once, she meant it. The client's property sat at the edge of a quieter neighborhood, not far from Daniel's house. It was modest, well-kept, with an exterior that suggested practicality over display. Ethan was already there. Of course he was. He stood near the open back of a truck, organizing materials with efficient, deliberate movements. He didn't rush, but nothing about him lingered unnecessarily either. He looked up as they pulled in. "Morning," Daniel called. Ethan nodded once. His gaze shifted to Sally, briefly taking in the change in her appearance. No comment. Somehow, that felt worse than if he had said something. "Where do you want us?" Daniel asked. "Inside first," Ethan replied. "Walk through." They followed him in. The house was empty but full of potential, the kind of space Sally would have once evaluated in terms of staging and impression. She found herself pausing differently now, trying to see it through the lens Daniel had described. Function first. Reality first. "What's the plan?" she asked. Ethan gestured toward the main living area. "Client wants something durable. Family space. Nothing delicate. They've got 2 kids and a dog." Sally nodded slowly. "So nothing that looks like it belongs in a showroom." He glanced at her. "Exactly." She folded her arms loosely, scanning the room. "Traffic flows off with the current layout. If they try to center everything around that wall, they'll bottleneck here." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. Sally shifted. "What?" Ethan tilted his head. "That's right." The approval wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't meant to be, but it landed anyway. "Okay," she said, recovering. "So we rotate the primary seating orientation, push storage to that far wall, keep this open." "Maybe," Ethan said. She frowned. "Maybe." He stepped further into the space, gesturing with one hand. "You're thinking clean lines, controlled movement. They're not going to move that way. Kids cut across space. Dog runs wide turns. You over-design it, it'll fall apart in a week." Her instinct was immediate. To argue, to defend the logic. But something held her back. "What would you do?" she asked instead. Ethan's gaze flickered briefly in surprise. Then he nodded. "Anchor points here and here," he said, indicating 2 areas with distinct placements. "Everything else flows around that. Nothing fragile in the center. Materials that don't punish mistakes." "Punish mistakes," she repeated. "Yeah," he said simply. She considered that. "All right," she said slowly. "So we design for what they will do, not what they should do." "Now you're getting it." There was no smile in his voice, but there was something else. Respect, maybe. Small. Earned. Daniel clapped his hands once. "Good. Now let's build it." Sally looked between them. "You mean now? What were you expecting?" Ethan asked. "A presentation phase?" He blinked once. "This is the presentation phase." She exhaled. "Right. Okay." The first time she carried something heavy, she nearly dropped it. It wasn't dramatic. Just a box that shifted unexpectedly, throwing off her balance enough to make her grip tighten abruptly. Ethan was there before it hit the ground. "Don't fight it," he said, steadying the other side. "I'm not fighting it," she replied, slightly breathless. "You're trying to control it. That's different." "It's not." She adjusted her hold, letting the weight settle more naturally. Felt counterintuitive. "Balance it instead," he said. "I am." "Not yet." She shifted again. This time it worked. "Okay," she admitted. They set it down together. "See?" he said. "I'm not praising you for that," she replied. "I didn't ask you to." Despite herself, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. The morning moved faster than she expected. There was no time to second-guess every decision. No space to polish each detail before moving on. Things happened in sequence, in response, in motion. It was exhausting. It was engaging. At one point, Daniel handed her a set of measurements. "Mark these," he said, gesturing toward the wall. She took them, kneeling slightly to line everything up properly. "This feels dangerous," she muttered. "You're drawing a line," he replied. "It's a very important line. Everything's important to you. Everything should be important." Ethan's voice cut in from across the room. "Not everything needs the same level of attention." Sally glanced up. "That sounds like an excuse." "It's prioritizing," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the wall. "Fine," she said, marking the spot confidently. A beat passed, then another. "Still straight," Daniel said helpfully. "Thank you," she replied. By early afternoon, her arms ached in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Her hands weren't used to this kind of work. Her mind wasn't used to not anticipating 10 steps ahead. And yet, when she stepped back and looked at what they had done so far, something unexpected settled in her chest. It wasn't pride. Not exactly. It was quieter than that. More immediate. "This is good," she said. Daniel glanced over. "It is." Ethan didn't look up from what he was doing. "It will be." She wiped her hands absently against her jeans, then stopped herself. For once, she didn't care. No one here cared. The realization was so simple it almost felt absurd. "You really think I won't last?" she asked suddenly, looking at Ethan. He paused, considered her, then shrugged slightly. "I think you haven't decided yet." The answer was honest, irritatingly so. "I showed up," she pointed out. "That's step 1. And the rest." He met her eyes fully. You stop trying to protect the version of you that doesn't work here. The words landed with quiet force. Not harsh. Not gentle. Just true. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. Okay, she said. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just acknowledging. And as she turned back to the work in front of her, the thought came uninvited but welcome. Maybe this wasn't about proving him wrong. Maybe it was about figuring out if he was right. And for the first time since she had stepped into this unfamiliar version of her life, that didn't scare her as much as it probably should have. Chapter 5 Cracks in Chemistry. By the end of the second week, Sally stopped thinking of the work as helping. She wasn't helping. She was in it. There was a difference, and she felt it in the way her body adjusted to the rhythm of the days. Mornings came easier now, earlier without resistance. Her hands bore small marks, nothing dramatic, but unmistakably earned. Her clothes had shifted from acceptable for work to simply usable. And more unsettlingly, she liked it. Not all of it. Not the sore muscles or the unpredictable pace or the constant need to adapt without preparation. But enough of it. Enough that she noticed. You're thinking again. Ethan's voice cut through her concentration as she stood over a spread of fabric samples on the work table. She hadn't realized how long she'd been staring at them. I'm choosing, she corrected. You've moved the same one 3 times. She straightened slightly, folding her arms. I'm evaluating texture, color response, and durability. You're indecisive, he said evenly. Her eyes narrowed. Precision takes time. Not this much. She turned toward him fully. Do you ever consider that maybe I'm trying to get it right the first time, so we don't waste time fixing it later? He didn't hesitate. Do you consider that overthinking slows everything down and still doesn't guarantee you're right? Pause. She held his gaze. That's not helpful, she said. It's accurate. That doesn't make it better. It's not supposed to. She exhaled sharply and picked up one of the samples again, running her fingers across the surface. It matters, she said, quieter now. People notice these things. No, he replied. People live with these things. That's not the same. She didn't respond right away. Her instincts pushed her to defend the detail, the polish, the thought behind every choice. But something in his phrasing lingered. Live with these things. Not admire them. Fine, she said eventually. Then what would you pick? He stepped closer, barely glancing at the options before selecting one. That one. She blinked. You didn't even look. I did. For what? 10 seconds? That's enough. Why? Because it holds up, he said. Doesn't show wear easily. Feels good without trying too hard. People won't be afraid to sit on it. Sally looked at the fabric in his hand. It wasn't the most striking option. It wasn't the one she would have chosen instinctively. It was solid. Reliable. You always reduce it to that, she said. To what? Function. Longevity. That's the goal. It's not the only goal. He tilted his head slightly. Then what is? She opened her mouth, closed it, because the answer she wanted to give felt thin. Comfort, she said finally. That's included. Not always. It should be. She looked at him for a long moment, something softer threading through her frustration. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said. Not easy. The distinction caught her off guard. And before she could respond, Daniel's voice cut in from the doorway. Good, he said. You're arguing. That means you're thinking. We're not arguing, Sally said automatically. You are, Ethan said at the same time. Daniel grinned. Perfect. The project wrapped later that evening than expected. Not because things went wrong, but because they pushed further than planned. Adjusting details, testing placement, making real decisions instead of theoretical ones. By the time they packed up, the space had transformed. It wasn't finished, but it was becoming something. Sally stood just inside the doorway, hands on her hips, taking it all in. Okay, she said slowly. That's actually good. Daniel laughed lightly. High praise. I mean it, she said. It feels different. Ethan closed the back of the truck with a solid click. It'll feel better when it's used. She glanced at him. You really don't care how things look, do you? I care that they don't fall apart when people stop looking at them. She rolled her eyes, but there was no real annoyance behind it, right? Because no one values how things look. They do, he said. Too much. The words landed closer than she expected. She didn't answer. Back at the house, the shift from work to quiet happened gradually. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen, already moving toward something familiar and simple for dinner. Sally lingered near the entryway, slipping off her shoes with a small sigh of relief. You holding up? Daniel called. I'm fine, she replied. Fine usually means you're about to complain. I'm not complaining. Give it 5 minutes. She huffed a quiet laugh despite herself and moved further inside. Ethan followed more slowly, setting down a set of tools near the garage door without ceremony. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence wasn't awkward, just present. You're different here, he said finally. Sally glanced over. Different how? He leaned back slightly against the wall, arms loosely crossed. Less controlled. She stiffened just a fraction. I'm still in control. Didn't say you weren't, he replied. Just less focused on showing it. She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the living room. That's not a bad thing, he added. I didn't say it was. You looked like you thought it was. I didn't. You did. She let out a slow breath. Do you always push conversations this far? Only when there's something there. She turned back to him. And what do you think is there? He didn't answer immediately. For once. Instead, he studied her, not in a way that felt invasive but not distant either. You're trying, he said. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. That's it? She asked. That's a lot. She swallowed, something tightening unexpectedly in her chest. I don't usually do things halfway, she said. I know. Do you? He nodded once. That's part of the problem. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Excuse me? You go all in on the wrong things, he said. Then you convince yourself that effort makes it right. The words hit. Clean, precise, and uncomfortably accurate. She crossed her arms, more out of instinct than defense. You don't know what I've done before this. I don't need to, he replied. I can see how you operate. And what does that mean? It means you care more than you should about things that don't matter, he said evenly. And not enough about the ones that do. Silence fell between them. Not sharp, not hostile, just heavy with meaning. She could argue. She could deflect. She could dismiss him entirely. Instead, yeah, she said quietly. The word surprised even her. Ethan didn't react the way she expected. No satisfaction. No victory. Just a small shift in his expression. Something that looked like acknowledgement. Most people don't admit that, he said. I'm not most people, she replied. That's becoming clear. They stood there for a moment longer, caught in something neither of them named. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't something she wanted to step away from either. We're getting food, Daniel called from the kitchen. And if neither of you answers, I'm assuming you've both passed out. Sally blinked, breaking the moment. We're coming. She moved past Ethan toward the kitchen, then paused. Hey, she said, glancing back. He looked at her. You were right about the fabric, she admitted. It wasn't easy to say, but it felt necessary. A small smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. I usually am. She rolled her eyes, but there was no edge to it. Don't get used to hearing it, she added. Too late. She shook her head, turning away before he could say anything else. But as she stepped into the kitchen, something had shifted again. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to notice. The cracks in her old thinking were widening, and somewhere in between the frustration, the honesty, and the increasingly familiar rhythm of this new life, there was something else forming. Something she hadn't been looking for. Something that didn't need to be polished or presented to exist. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't trying to control it. Chapter 6, Setback and Self-Reflection. The mistake didn't announce itself. It didn't crash loudly into the project or shatter something obvious. There was no single moment where Sally could point and say, there. Instead, it unfolded quietly, layer by layer, decision by decision. And by the time it surfaced clearly enough to name, it was already too embedded to ignore. We need to talk about the sofa choice. Daniel's tone wasn't sharp. That made it worse. Sally looked up from the invoices she had been reviewing, her fingers pausing mid-scroll. What about it? She asked carefully. He stepped further into the room, a folder tucked under his arm. The client called this morning. That's not unusual. No, he said. But this is. He opened the folder and slid a printed photo across the table. The sofa. Placed. Used. Slightly worn. Much faster than it should have been. Sally frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, Ethan said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. Her gaze shifted to him. No, it doesn't. That fabric was rated for controlled use, he interrupted. Low abrasion. Clean environment. Her chest tightened slightly. That's not what the supplier said. It's what the material does, he replied. That's not the same thing. It is in practice. The room felt smaller. Sally looked back at the photo, her eyes scanning the details. The subtle wear patterns, the spots where color had dulled unevenly, the slight distortion in the cushions. That shouldn't happen this quickly, she said, quieter now. It should if you ignore how people actually use it, Ethan replied. The words landed without aggression. That didn't make them easier. I didn't ignore anything, she said, more firmly than she felt. I reviewed the specifications. You chose it because it looked better, he said. Her mouth opened, closed, because that wasn't entirely wrong. I balanced both, she said finally. No, he replied evenly. You leaned toward appearance and told yourself it would hold. The silence that followed was thick. Daniel shifted slightly, his voice stepping in without stepping between them. The client's not angry, he said. They just want a solution. Sally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Okay, she said quickly. We can replace it. Adjust the cost. It's manageable. It is, Daniel agreed. But that's not the point. She looked at him. I know, she said, and she did. They visited the client that afternoon. Sally stood in the same living space she had once looked at with quiet satisfaction, seeing it now through a different lens. Not potential. Consequence. The room was still good. The layout worked. The flow held up. But the sofa pulled attention in a way it wasn't supposed to. Not because it looked impressive. Because it didn't. We love the space, the client said, her tone warm but edged with uncertainty. We really do. It's just this one piece. Sally nodded, forcing herself to meet her eyes. It's not holding up the way it should. The admission felt like stepping onto unstable ground. But it didn't collapse beneath her. If you're okay with it, she continued, we'll replace it with something more durable. No additional cost to you. The client's shoulders relaxed slightly. That would be amazing. We'll handle it, Daniel added. And we'll make sure the replacement fits your actual use. Not just the original design intent, Sally said. Ethan didn't speak, but she felt his attention shift. When they left, the drive back was quieter than usual. Not tense, just reflective. I can't believe I missed that, Sally said finally, breaking the silence as they pulled into the driveway. You didn't miss it, Ethan replied. She frowned. Then what? You saw it. You just didn't prioritize it. The distinction landed harder than she expected. That's worse, she said. Yeah. Daniel shut off the engine but didn't move to get out. You're not the first person to make that call, he said. And you won't be the last. That doesn't help, she replied. It's not supposed to, he said gently. She looked down at her hands, fingers laced together tighter than necessary. I thought I was getting better at this, she said. You are, Ethan said. She looked up quickly. That doesn't feel accurate. It is, he replied. You just haven't replaced your instincts yet. The phrasing caught her attention. Replaced? She asked. Yeah, he said. You're still running your old process. You just pause now before acting. That's progress, not change. She leaned back in her seat, her mind turning over the words. So I'm still the same person, she said. No, he replied. You're aware now. That's the difference. Doesn't feel like enough. It's where it starts. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to mess this up, she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her. Then don't. She let out a short, humorless laugh. That's incredibly helpful advice. It's simple, he said. Not easy. She looked between them. The same distinction again. Different context. Same truth. That night, she didn't go to bed right away. The house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Daniel had turned in early. Ethan had left hours ago. Sally sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open but ignored. The numbers from the project sat in front of her. Costs, adjustments, replacement options. All fixable. All manageable. But that wasn't what held her there. It was the pattern. The realization that she hadn't made a random mistake. She had followed a familiar path. Chosen something that felt just slightly better on the surface. Convinced herself it would work anyway. And moved forward with confidence. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples lightly. Things that don't hold up, she murmured. Ethan's voice again. It had become annoyingly present in her thoughts. You care more about things that don't matter. She closed her eyes briefly. Because he hadn't said it harshly. He hadn't needed to. The truth didn't require volume. Her gaze drifted around the kitchen. Simple. Functional. Uncomplicated. Nothing here tried to impress her. Everything here worked. This isn't who I was supposed to be, she said softly. But even as the words left her mouth, they felt off. Because who had decided that? When had she made that agreement? And why had she never questioned it until now? She sat up slowly, pulling a piece of paper toward her. No apps. No polished interface. Just a pen. What actually matters? She asked aloud. The question felt basic, stripped down, honest. She hesitated, then started writing. Not what looked good. Not what people expected. What held up. The list wasn't long, but it was clear. She stared at it for a long moment after she finished, then nodded once. Okay, she said quietly. The next morning, Ethan was already in the garage when she stepped in. He glanced up briefly, then went back to sorting materials. You're early, he said. So are you. I'm always early. That's fair. She stepped further into the space, her posture more deliberate than usual. I want to fix it properly, she said. He didn't look up. We are. No, she said. I want to understand it. Fully. Not just replace the piece. That got his attention. He straightened slightly, meeting her gaze. All right, he said. I didn't just make a bad choice, she continued. I made a familiar one. He waited. I picked something that looked right and convinced myself it would perform, she said. Even when the signs said otherwise. He nodded once. That's accurate. I don't want to do that again. Then don't. She gave him a look. You're really consistent with that advice. It works. She exhaled. but a faint smile touched her expression. "Help me recalibrate," she said. The words came out steadier than she expected. Not defensive, not reluctant, just clear. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "We start with materials." "No," she replied, surprising both of them. "We start with how people actually live." Pause. Then a small shift in his expression. Approval. "Yeah," he said. "Now we're getting somewhere." And as Sally stepped further into the workspace, ready to rebuild not just the project but the way she approached everything, the setback no longer felt like failure. Felt like direction. Chapter 7. Choosing real over perfect. The replacement sofa arrived 3 days later. Sally stood in the client's living room again, but this time she didn't rush the moment, didn't mentally adjust lighting or angles or imagine how the finished space would appear to someone walking in for the first time. Instead, she watched. The way the client's daughter dropped onto the cushion without hesitation. The way the dog circled twice before settling heavily into the opposite corner. The way the client herself pressed her hand briefly into the fabric, testing it without even realizing she was doing so. No one asked how it looked. They interacted with it. "It already feels better," the client said, relief softening her voice. Sally nodded. It should last a lot longer. She didn't add qualifiers, didn't justify the choice, didn't explain the process behind it. She let the result speak. Ethan gave a small approving glance from across the room, subtle enough that anyone else might have missed it. She didn't, and, unexpectedly, she felt something steady settle in her chest. Not pride, not exactly, something closer to alignment. Back at the house, the shift was quieter but just as real. Sally moved through her brother's space differently now. Not as a guest, not as someone temporarily displaced, but as someone who belonged within its rhythm. The spare room had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. She had added a small desk lamp, a single framed photo she actually liked, a folded blanket at the edge of the bed. Not decorative, just useful. Nothing felt staged. Nothing needed to. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. "Settling in?" Daniel asked from the hallway. She glanced over. "Yeah. You haven't reorganized the entire house yet, so I'm impressed." "Give me time." He smirked. "Please don't." She leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not trying to control everything anymore. That's progress. It's uncomfortable. It should be." She nodded once. "Yeah." He studied her for a moment. "You're different." "I know. Good different," he added quickly. She smiled faintly. "I'm starting to think so too." Work picked up quickly after that. More clients. More projects. More opportunities to test the shift she had started but was still learning to trust. It showed up in small ways. She asked different questions now, not what would look best, but what will people actually use? She paused less when making decisions. She explained things more clearly, without hiding behind layered language or polished presentations. And sometimes she still got it wrong. But when she did, she saw it sooner. Adjusted faster. Owned it fully. "You're not hesitating anymore?" Ethan said one afternoon as they reviewed a set of plans. She glanced up. "That's the goal, right?" "Depends," he replied. "You hesitated for a reason before." "I hesitated because I was trying to be perfect," she said. "Now I'm trying to be right." He considered that. "There's a difference," she added. "I know." She leaned back slightly, studying him. "You don't say that like it's obvious. It's not obvious to most people." "I'm starting to notice." He nodded once, then tapped a point on the plan. "You switched this layout." "I did." "Why?" "Because the original plan assumed people would move around the space logically," she said. "They won't." A faint shift in his expression. Approval again. Smaller this time, but steadier. "Good call," he said. The simplicity of it hit her harder than she expected. Not because she needed the validation, but because she had earned it. It happened gradually. The shift between them. Not a moment. Not a spark. Something slower. More deliberate. Built in pieces. They worked side by side often now, conversations moving easily between practical decisions and something just beneath them. Unspoken but not invisible. "You're not trying to impress me anymore," Ethan said one evening. Sally didn't look up from the measurements she was reviewing. "I never was." "You were." She glanced at him. "Maybe at first. Why'd you stop?" She considered the question. "Because it doesn't work on you," she said simply. "That's part of it." "And the other part?" "You stopped needing it," he replied. The words settled between them. She didn't deflect, didn't argue. "Yeah," she said quietly. He leaned against the work table, studying her in that same way he always did, direct, unfiltered but not unkind. "You're better like this," he said. "Less polished. More real." She exhaled softly, a small smile touching her lips. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." A pause. "Longer than necessary." "You're not bad yourself," she added. His brow lifted slightly. "High praise." "I'm serious," she said. "You're consistent." "Careful," he replied. That almost sounded like admiration. She rolled her eyes, but it lingered there. Unspoken, undeniable. The realization didn't come all at once. It was built through moments like that, through small acknowledgments and shared work and quiet understanding. It wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. And when it finally surfaced fully, it didn't surprise her as much as it might have. They were in the garage late, finishing up details on a set of materials for the next project. The space smelled faintly of wood and fabric and something grounding she had begun to associate with this life. Sally set the last sample into place, stepping back slightly. "That should do it," she said. Ethan nodded, then looked at her. Not past her, not through her. Her. "You're staying," he said. It wasn't a question. She felt it settle inside her, steady and certain. "Yeah," she said. "I am." He didn't look surprised, just recognizing. "That's good," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "For the business?" "For everything," he replied. The air between them shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Sally didn't look away this time, didn't step back. "What are you saying?" she asked. He didn't rush the answer. "I'm saying," he began. "I didn't think you'd change this much." She smiled faintly. "You and everyone else. I was wrong. That must be difficult for you." Occasionally, the quiet humor settled between them, grounding the moment. "And," she pressed. "And," he continued, "I like who you are now." The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Not exaggerated, not dressed up, just honest. She held his gaze, something steadying instead of unraveling. "I like who I am now too," she said. Felt new, and entirely true. Another pause, closer this time. "So what does that mean?" she asked. He didn't step forward, but he didn't step away either. "It means," he said carefully, "we don't need to rush anything." She nodded. "I'm not rushing," she said. "Good. But I'm also not pretending I don't see what's happening." His mouth curved slightly. "Neither am I." She let out a soft breath, something lighter than it had been in years. "Okay," she said. Not a conclusion, not a declaration, just acknowledgement. Real. And enough. Later that night, as Sally lay in her room, her actual room now, not something temporary, she stared at the ceiling again. But it felt different, less unfamiliar, more open. She thought about everything that had changed. The work, the space, the way she thought, the way she moved through her own life. And then him. She smiled slightly, the expression effortless. For the first time in years, she wasn't measuring where she stood against anyone else. Wasn't calculating timelines or milestones or expectations. She wasn't behind. She had never been behind. She had just been somewhere else entirely. And now she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And finally, enough. Chapter 8. A different kind of success. Months passed without Sally noticing when the transition stopped feeling like a transition. There was no clear moment where she could say this is when it became permanent. No dramatic shift or final decision that sealed everything into place. Simply, became her life. The business no longer felt like Daniel's that she was helping to grow. Felt like theirs. Client calls came to her as often as they did to him. Decisions weren't second-guessed or deferred. They were made quickly, confidently, with a clarity she hadn't known she was capable of before. The work had expanded naturally. Not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that reflected it. "You didn't even hesitate," Daniel said one afternoon, leaning against the work table as Sally finished explaining a revised layout to a client over the phone. She ended the call, setting her phone down with a small nod. "Because it was obvious. It wouldn't have been 6 months ago." "That's true." He smiled slightly. "You've caught up." She shook her head. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "No, I was never behind," she said. "I just wasn't paying attention to the right things." He considered that, then nodded once. "Yeah." Her finances had changed too. Not dramatically at first, but steadily. Living in Daniel's house had given her space, not just physically but mentally. Without the constant pressure to maintain a lifestyle that didn't actually support her, the numbers had begun to make sense again. Debt declined. Savings grew. Slowly. Consistently. She didn't track it obsessively anymore. She didn't need to. The control she had once chased had shifted into something more stable. Something quieter. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing their quarterly numbers. Not personally, but for the business. Revenue had increased. Expenses were steady. Opportunities ahead. "This is good," she said. Daniel glanced over from the counter. "It is." She leaned back slightly, exhaling through a small smile. "We actually built something." "We did. We're still building it," she corrected. Better phrasing. She closed the laptop, letting her hands rest lightly on the table. "I didn't think it would feel like this," she said. "What did you expect?" "More pressure," she admitted. "More something." Daniel shrugged. "That's because you used to make everything harder than it needed to be." "Fair." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the garage door. "You know," she added, "I haven't thought about my old job in weeks. That's a good sign. It feels like someone else lived that life." He smiled. In a way, they did. Ethan still showed up early. That hadn't changed. What had changed was how Sally understood it. Before, she had seen it as rigidity. Now she saw it as attention, consistency, a choice. "You're late," she said one morning, glancing at the clock as she stepped into the garage. He didn't look up immediately. "By 3 minutes. You're slipping. Temporary setback." She smiled faintly, stepping further into the space. Their conversations had shifted too. Less friction. More ease. The sharp edges hadn't disappeared, but they no longer felt like resistance. They felt like structure. "You've been quiet," he said after a moment. "I've been thinking. That's always dangerous. Sometimes productive." He glanced at her. "About what?" She leaned lightly against the table. "About what comes next. That's a broad subject." "Not really." She met his gaze directly. "I don't want to leave this," she said. "Not the business. Not the house. Not this." The word hung there. Deliberate. Uncomplicated. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Not because he needed time to think. Because he always took the time anyway. "That's not a bad place to land," he said finally. "It doesn't feel like settling." "That's because it's not." She nodded slightly, something steadying rather than shifting. "I used to think I had to have everything lined up perfectly," she said. "Career, life, relationships. Like if it didn't look right, it wasn't right. And now," she glanced around the garage, the tools, the materials, the quiet evidence of real work. "Now I think it just has to hold up." The words felt natural. True. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. Approval, yes, but something deeper too. "Yeah," he said. "That's it." The moment itself wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. They were finishing a smaller project. A quick turnaround for a client who valued practicality over presentation. The kind of work Sally now appreciated on a level she hadn't before. When it was done, they stepped back together, looking at the result. Simple. Solid. Complete. "That works," she said. "It does," Ethan agreed. They stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Not analyzing. Not adjusting. Just seeing it. Then he turned to her. "You're not trying to leave anymore," he said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head slightly. "No." "Good." There was another pause. Different this time. More focused. "You know what this is, right?" she said. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yeah," he replied. And it works." She smiled slightly. "That's not exactly poetic. It's accurate. That's your version of everything. It served me well." She studied him for a moment, then stepped a little closer. "You don't need to overcomplicate it," she said. "I'm not." "Good." Another step. Close enough now that the space between them felt intentional. "So we're just going to stand here and acknowledge it?" she asked. "If that's enough." She shook her head softly. "It's not." That was all the invitation needed. The space between them closed without urgency, without hesitation. The contact wasn't tentative, but it wasn't overwhelming either. It was steady, considered, real. When she stepped back, there was no rush to define it further. No need to layer it with expectations. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he agreed. And that was enough. Later that evening, Sally stood outside Daniel's house, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. The same one she had pulled into months ago, uncertain and uneasy. It looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because she had. "You're thinking again." She glanced over as Daniel stepped outside, leaning lightly against the railing. "It's becoming a habit," she said. "Better than ignoring things." "Definitely." He followed her gaze out toward the street. "You all right?" She nodded. Then, after a moment, "Yeah," she said. "I really am." He studied her briefly, then smiled. "Good." She leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing in a way that felt natural now. Not performed. Not managed. Just comfortable. "I thought I needed everything figured out," she said. "A husband. A house. A plan that looked right from the outside. And now," she smiled faintly, "now I have a life that actually fits." He nodded once, satisfied. "And?" he prompted. She let her gaze drift toward the house, toward the garage, toward the life she had built inside it. "And I like it better." The answer came easily, without hesitation, without doubt. The version of success she had once chased felt distant now. Not wrong, just incomplete. What she had instead wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It didn't need to impress anyone. It held up. And for the first time in her life, that was more than enough. Epilogue, 3 years later, the house fit. That was the first thing Sally noticed every morning. Even now, even after living in it long enough that nothing should have felt new anymore. It fit the way her life finally did. Not in the polished, controlled sense she once chased. Not in the curated, carefully assembled way that looked complete from a distance but shifted under real weight. This house held up. There were scuffs on the floors where furniture had been moved, not strategically placed. The couch, Ethan's choice of course, looked better with time instead of worse. The kitchen table bore the faint evidence of real meals, real conversations, Real days that didn't need to be documented to matter. And outside, just down the street, Daniel's house stood exactly where it always had. Close enough that she didn't think about distance anymore. Close enough that it simply felt like part of the same life. You're doing it again. Ethan's voice came from behind her as she stood at the front window, one hand resting lightly over the curve of her stomach. She didn't turn right away. Doing what? Thinking. It's a bad habit. It used to be. She smiled faintly and glanced back at him. Now it's just quieter. That's because you're not arguing with yourself anymore. She considered that, then nodded once. Yeah, that felt right. 3 years had changed everything without ever feeling forced. They'd married after 2, not in a rush, not because of a timeline, but because there stopped being a reason not to. The wedding had been simple, fun. Exactly the kind of day she would never have planned in her old life, and exactly the kind she wouldn't change now. Daniel had stood beside Ethan, steady as ever, delivering a speech that had landed with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. Not dramatic, just true. And now the business was something real. Not growing for the sake of growth. Not chasing recognition. Just solid. Clients came because the work lasted. Because it fit their lives instead of trying to shape them into something else. Sally didn't think about success the way she used to. She saw it in the way things held. In the consistency. In the fact that nothing felt like it was about to fall apart. You ready? Ethan asked, pulling her attention back. She hesitated, not because she doubted it, but because the moment held something heavier now. I think so, she said. He studied her for a beat, then nodded. That was all. He didn't over-explain. Didn't fill the space. He never did. The hospital felt different than she had imagined. Less overwhelming. More focused. Everything narrowed in a way that made the outside world fade naturally instead of being pushed away. Her mother hovered near her side, steady and present. Ethan's mother moved in the background, already moving into that quiet, capable energy that filled space without crowding it. They were both focused, not on themselves, not on the moment as something to celebrate. On her. You're doing exactly what you need to do, her mom said gently. I know, Sally replied. Her voice measured as she worked through another contraction. She didn't try to control it, didn't try to anticipate it. She just let it happen. The way she had learned to approach everything that actually mattered. Ethan stayed close, never instructing, never stepping ahead of her. Just there, solid, unmoving in the way she now trusted completely. Outside, she knew the waiting room was full. Daniel, Claire, though now it felt strange to still think of her that way when she'd been together 2 years. She fit into his life the same way everything else had eventually learned to, without pressure, without forcing shape. And the parents, all of them, gathered, waiting, probably worse than nervous, probably trying not to pace. That thought almost made her smile. In the waiting room, Daniel was pacing. Claire sat calmly, watching him circle for the 3rd time in as many minutes. You're going to wear a path into the floor, she said. I'm fine, he replied immediately. You're not. I'm aware. She smiled slightly. Sit. He hesitated, then dropped into the chair beside her. For about 10 seconds, then leaned forward again. Across from them, Ethan's mom and Sally's mom were drifting in and out of conversation, the energy already shifting into something anticipatory. They're going to lose it the second they see the baby, Daniel said. Claire nodded. Completely. And then, he added, glancing at her, they're going to turn on us. She laughed softly. That part already started. He groaned. I knew it. You've had 2 years to prepare, she pointed out. I chose not to acknowledge it as a real threat. That was your first mistake. Despite himself, he smiled. Then his gaze shifted to the doors again. Waiting. Just waiting. Inside, the moment came not with clarity, but with inevitability. Sally leaned into it, her focus narrowing to a single point. No second guessing. No hesitation. Just effort. Just presence. This is it, her mother said softly. Sally nodded, her grip tightening slightly in Ethan's hand. He stayed exactly where he needed to be. You're right there, he said. She pushed forward. And for a brief moment everything stretched, held. Then it happened. The sound that followed cut through the room. Sharp, immediate, alive. Sally exhaled, her body finally releasing the tension she had carried through it all. And then he was there. They placed him in her arms, warm and small and startlingly real. Sally looked down at him, her breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Hey, she whispered. Her voice softened in a way she hadn't heard before. Ethan leaned in closer, his hand instinctively finding the space just behind her shoulder. What are we calling him? Her mother asked gently. Sally didn't hesitate. She looked up, met Ethan's eyes, then back down at the tiny, shifting weight in her arms. Daniel, she said. The name settled into the room with a quiet certainty. Right, exactly right. When the door finally opened and the news traveled down the hall, Daniel stood before anyone else had time to react. How is she? He asked immediately. They're both doing great, the nurse said with a warm smile. You have a beautiful baby boy. Relief hit fast, visible, immediate. Can we? In a moment, she said. He nodded, stepping back, hands running through his hair once. Then again. Claire reached for his arm, grounding him. You're an uncle, she said. I know, he replied, the words catching slightly. And when they finally let him in, when he stepped into the room and saw them, something shifted. Sally looked up, catching his expression instantly. Hey, she said softly. He didn't answer right away, didn't move quickly. He just stood there for a second, taking it in. His sister, his nephew, real, complete. And then he blinked, hard. And the emotion he didn't usually let break through did. Sally had seen her brother steady through everything. Calm, grounded, unshaken. This was the first time she had ever seen him cry. You did good, he said finally, his voice rough, uneven in a way she had never heard before. She smiled, tired but full in a way she couldn't have imagined. Yeah, she said softly. I did. Behind him, the rest of the family crowded in, already shifting into that excited chaos she had predicted. Voices overlapping, hands reaching, everyone already leaning too close. Grandparents in full force. Oh my goodness, look at him. He's perfect. Let me see. Careful, no, I've got him. And now, Daniel muttered quietly to Claire, watching the scene explode around them. We're next. Claire smiled, entirely unbothered. Eventually, he shook his head faintly, but there was no resistance behind it. Just understanding, because that was how things worked now. Not rushed, not staged, just real. And in the center of it all, Sally held her son close, her world settling into something steady, full, and unforced. Not perfect, not polished, but stronger than anything she had ever tried to build before. And for the first time, there was nothing left to question. Everything she had needed, she was already holding.